I was 34, newly widowed, and standing under a string of pastel balloons when my little sister announced to a room full of people that her baby was my late husband's son. Paper crowns, smash cake, and then boom! She held up a printed will like it was a golden ticket and said she'd be claiming half of my house. The number, $800,000, hung in the air like a dare. I remember the hush that fell over the kitchen, the way plastic forks stopped midair, the smell of frosting and coffee turning sweet and sour in my throat. I remember thinking that grief is heavy, but audacity might be heavier. If you're new here, this is where I breathe, take a sip of water, and ask you to hit like and subscribe, because apparently my life went from quiet to cinematic without asking first. Let me back up. 8 days earlier, I'd signed papers at the funeral home with hands that didn't feel like mine. Brain aneurysm, they said, as if 2 words could explain how a man who ran 5 miles every Saturday could just not be here anymore. On that Tuesday morning, Nathan had kissed my forehead, told me my coffee was too strong, laughed when I told him he'd drink it anyway, and walked out the door. There was a phone call, then a corridor that smelled like antiseptic in winter, then a doctor with kind eyes saying the word sudden over and over. Everything since then had been a blur stitched to a blur. Casseroles, lilies, the echo of his laugh ricocheting off walls that felt too big. So when Tessa picked that exact moment, Noah's first birthday, to make her announcement, I was already hollowed out. She stood by the high chair, a smear of blue icing on her wrist, and said Noah was Nathan's child. People around us tried to make their faces neutral, the way you hold a grocery bag with a broken handle and pretend it's fine. Then she unfolded a few pages, the top line in bold, the rest in a jumble of legal-ish language that would have been funny if it hadn't been so cruel. She said it proved Nathan had left her half the house. She said she was only doing what was right for her son. I walked over, asked to see it. My voice sounded calm, the way your voice does when something fragile is sliding off a shelf and you're reaching, hoping it won't shatter. The paper was grainy, whereas was misspelled. Sections were out of order, like someone had copied a template and forgot to fix the seams. The signature looked like it had been traced by someone who'd seen Nathan's name on a screen and tried to teach their hand how to lie. People shifted and made small talk with the walls. Someone turned off the music. Noah squealed at a helium balloon and banged a plastic spoon like a drum, oblivious and perfect. I handed the pages back and said I needed air. I kissed Noah's hair, which smelled like soap and buttercream, and told Tessa we'd talk later. I kept my face smooth until I reached my car. Then, with the door closed and the engine off, I let out a laugh that sounded a little unhinged. Not because any of this was funny, but because the claim was impossible in a way only Nathan and I knew. Imagine looking at a locked door while the person on the other side insists it's wide open. That kind of laugh. I pressed my forehead to the steering wheel and breathed until my hands stopped shaking. Here's the thing about grief. It doesn't erase the life you had. It makes it brighter and sharper, like someone turned up the contrast on every memory. I met Nathan at a charity auction in Boston, one of those nights where the lighting is flattering and the wine is poured just a little too fast. I'd put together a small package, design consult, paint colors, a vintage lamp I'd restored, and ended up next to a landscape painting of Boston Harbor that made me feel like I was standing on the pier, smelling salt and diesel and beginnings. Nathan outbid everyone by a mile. When he won, he did something that made me watch him differently. He donated the painting back so it could be auctioned again, so the nonprofit could raise more. I just wanted to make sure it got noticed, he said, shrugging. Then he asked if I'd show him the best late-night place for pie. Our first date was easy in a way that felt like a trick. We walked along the water, let the wind do its worst, and told each other stories we usually saved for people who already loved us. He was an engineer who kept a notebook full of little drawings, ideas for bridges, lamps, a perfect bookshelf that could fold around a corner. I was an interior designer who had learned to love old things without trying to turn them into new ones. We shared fries, we shared a taxi, we shared the kind of look that made everything else around us fade out. He proposed a year later near Boston Harbor. The painting he had once given away, now hanging in his apartment behind a couch that was too big, and a rug that was too small. We'd eaten oysters and laughed until our faces hurt. He told me that every time he passed the water, he thought about how beginnings can feel like endings if you're not paying attention, and he didn't want to miss anything with me. He didn't go down on one knee because he said he'd feel silly in front of the tourists. And then he did anyway, because he said I smiled like I'd say yes. We bought a Victorian in Beacon Hill with floors that creaked like they were talking to each other. The trim was painted the wrong white. The kitchen had a sink you could bathe a small dog in and cabinets that closed with a sigh. I could see what it could be. He could see how to make it strong. We peeled wallpaper until our fingers were pruny, found traces of other lives in the walls, old grocery lists in pencil, a child's drawing of a cat wearing a hat. We named the cat in the drawing and kept it taped inside the pantry door for luck. We thought a house meant a family would follow, because that's the myth you grow up with. We tried, we saved. We went to appointments that required clipboards and fluorescent lighting and hope that had to be renewed every 2 weeks. 4 rounds of IVF left me feeling like a pincushion with a smiley face sticker slapped on top. Nathan kept snacks in his pocket and jokes in his other pocket. He held my hand and never once tried to fix a thing he couldn't fix. He said he wanted a life with me, not a checklist. When the last cycle failed, we sat on the kitchen floor with takeout and no appetite and said we were tired. Not of each other. God, never of that. But of the tunnel with no light and the way every "I'm so happy for you" to other people tasted like paper. We let ourselves stop. We took a trip we couldn't really afford and justified it by pointing to all the years we had been practical. We ate street food in a city where no one knew us, slept with the windows open and the curtains dancing, and talked about how fullness doesn't always look like what you pictured at 22. Back home, we poured that restless wanting into work and into the house. Nathan built floating shelves that looked like they'd grown straight from the plaster. I started taking on bigger projects, said yes to clients who scared me a little, and then said yes again when they referred me to their friends. He was the first investor in my tiny company, the one who told me to put my name on the door even when the door was a shared desk in a co-working space, and the name was a decal I printed on sale. Our weekends looked like neighborhoods. We walked through Beacon Hill, counting carved newel posts and dogs in sweaters. We learned the rhythm of the street sweeper. We bought tomatoes from a farmer who called everyone kiddo, no matter how old they were. When a pipe behind the upstairs bathroom wall blew and soaked the linen closet, we stayed up all night with towels and fans and a YouTube video from 2011 that made everything seem doable. At 3 a.m, Nathan said, "I'm so in love with this soggy life." And I laughed and believed him. So yes, when I say my house now, I mean the house we made together in Beacon Hill. The one with our paint under our nails and our measurements penciled inside the closet where no one will ever see them. It's the place where he danced me around the dining room because the song on the radio told him to. The place where we learned how to live without the thing we wanted most and found out we could still be happy. Which is why standing in that kitchen at Noah's birthday listening to Tessa felt like someone walking into a church and lighting a cigarette. She'd always been impulsive, dramatic in a way that made people either flock to her or sprint in the other direction. But this was something else. It reached into the rawest part of my grief and poked it like a bruise. I won't unpack the why of my laughter yet. That belongs to what came next, to the careful steps I took after I left that party and the folder I opened that changed everything. For now, know this: I didn't crumble and I didn't shout. I put the fake will back in her hands. I kissed the baby who had nothing to do with any of it, and I walked out before I said something I couldn't undo. In the quiet of the car, I could hear Nathan in my head saying, "Breathe, Em." So I did. I let the absurdity of it fizz out of me. I looked up at the balloons bobbing in the apartment window like small moons and thought about the first time I saw him in that auction hall, generous without looking around to make sure anyone noticed. I thought about the harbor, the ring, the rug we replaced twice because the first 2 shed like a golden retriever. I thought about how you can be devastated and clear-eyed at the same time. When the laughter faded, a steadiness settled in. Grief had made me feel like a ghost in my own life. But this This woke up some spine I didn't know I still had. I started the car, not to drive anywhere, just to feel the hum under my hands. "Okay," I told the empty passenger seat. "Okay." Tessa has always been the kind of beautiful that turns a room into a stage. She didn't mean to steal the spotlight, it was just how she moved through the world. Loud laugh, quick tears, stories that made strangers lean in. I grew up learning to steady things after she passed through, like someone tidying a counter after flour lifts in a cloud. Teachers loved her, then worried about her, then called my mom at midnight. Bosses told her she had promise, then asked her to take a week to reset. She could be generous in a way that left you breathless and reckless, in a way that left you counting what you had left. She met Shane at a bar where I'd picked up takeout fries on my way home from a late install. He was behind the counter, all forearms and easy charm, flicking a bottle cap into a bucket like he'd trained for it. Tessa said he made her feel like a song on the radio. When she brought him to dinner, he called my mom ma'am, teased my dad about the Red Sox, and asked Nathan sincere questions about bridges like he'd always wondered about load-bearing math. He was funny. He was also the kind of man who loved the fire more than the warmth. They were bright, and then they were smoky, and then they were ash, and then they were bright again. You could hear them laughing from the sidewalk. You could hear them fighting from the next block. When she told me she was pregnant, we were in the cereal aisle staring at a wall of choices as if life were as simple as picking the right box. Tessa held a test in a brown paper bag like it might bite. She said she hadn't planned it, then said maybe she had, then said she didn't know what she'd planned at all. I wrapped my arms around her and felt her shaking. We sat in my car and ate granola bars we didn't want and made a list of the things she'd need. Like a list could make it all tidy. A bigger diaper bag, a budget, a calendar on the fridge. She called Shane, and he came through with flowers that looked stolen from a hotel lobby and promises that sounded good at midnight. There's a particular ache when your sister's life bends towards something you've been reaching for with both hands. I tried to hold my jealousy without letting it rest against Tessa's skin. Nathan and I said out loud that we were happy for her, because we were. We also took turns crying in the shower because we were that too. When Tessa had morning sickness that lasted all day, I dropped off crackers and ginger tea. When she sent ultrasound photos, I texted back hard eyes and asked good questions. When she and Shane broke up for the third time and then made up 2 days later, I kept my mouth closed and my guest room made up, just in case. The night she asked if I'd be in the delivery room, she was lying with her head in my lap, a movie playing we weren't really watching. "You're the person I can hear when things get loud," she said. My throat went tight and I nodded. I meant it when I told her I'd show up. I meant it when I said we'd figure it out. I didn't have a map for the part where I wanted what she had and loved her with my whole ribcage at the same time. That winter, the city felt like it had been iced over. Nathan and I decorated our Beacon Hill house with branches that looked good even when they were bare. We strung lights the way he liked, measured twice the way he always did, and made the kind of soup that sits heavy in a good way. Tessa and Shane were on, and then they were taking space, and then they were on again. When she was sweet, she was honey. When she was scared, she stung. She sent me baby names in the middle of the night, then a picture of a crib, then a screenshot of her bank app like the numbers might change if I stared hard enough. I helped where I could without making it feel like a trade. If I had known what was coming for us, I would have taken 1,000 more photos of the ordinary. But how do you know to memorize the way someone rinses an apple or the sound they make when they find the missing drill bit? How do you know to write down the exact color of their eyes when they stand in the pantry looking for honey that's right in front of them? The day Nathan died was a Tuesday that started like any other. He kissed my forehead, laughed at my too strong coffee, and waved the way he always waved, with his wrist loose and his fingers spread. The hospital smell, the kind eyes, the careful words. I've already told you. That's the part that won't stop rerunning. The funeral felt like a play I hadn't auditioned for. People pressed my hands and told me about the time Nathan fixed their wobbly table or coached their kids' science project or showed up with a drill and a smile. I believed every story because that's the person he was. He took up space in a room and somehow left more space for everyone else. My parents hovered, my dad solid and quiet, my mom starting every sentence with "sweetheart" and ending every second sentence with "you need to eat." Tessa floated in late, moved to the back, disappeared for a while, came up to me with mascara like bruises, and whispered she couldn't breathe, whispered she wasn't ready for this, whispered she'd call me tomorrow and didn't. Grief is loud, and then it's so quiet you can hear your own heartbeat. In that hush, the days unspooled. There were forms to fill out and plants to water and a bed that felt too big. The house held onto the shape of him, his jacket over the chair, his notebook open to a sketch of a shelf he never got to build. I slept on his side one night and my side the next, like choosing might break something sacred. The world kept going. Trash day happened, the mail arrived, the neighbor's dog barked at nothing. I kept thinking, this can't be the part of the story I'm in. 8 days after the funeral, I went to Noah's first birthday because family is the kind of word you can't bring yourself to say no to. The apartment was dressed in primary colors. Kara had made a banner that said 1, each letter cut out like a little crown. The cake was the kind you smash more than you eat. People we knew and people we didn't circled the table and practiced the smile you use when you want to be kind and don't know how. I told myself I could do an hour. I told myself I could sing, clap, and then slip out. Tessa looked electric with nerves, a thin crackle of energy running under her skin. She'd texted me the day before that she wanted to make a speech. I thought she meant something about motherhood, about the village it takes, about how lucky Noah was to be surrounded by so much noise and love. I stood by the sink with a paper cup and watched Noah lick frosting from his fingers. For a moment, I let the sound of other people's lives wash over me like a safe tide. Someone talking about an apartment hunt, someone else about the tea station running late. Then Tessa tapped a fork against her glass, and the room turned toward her like a field of tulips toward the sun. She said she had news. She said it with that stage voice she'd always had, the one that makes you think she's about to announce a surprise trip or a new job. She said Noah's father was Nathan. The air did that trick where it feels thick, like it's learning how to be air again. My cup bent in my hand. Someone laughed by accident and then covered their mouth. Tessa unfolded papers and used words like bequeath and beneficiary, as if she'd swallowed a legal commercial and was now repeating it back. I've already told you what those pages felt like in my hand, wrong in the small ways that make a big thing wobble. I've already told you what I did. I asked for them, studied them, gave them back, kissed the baby, left before my mouth could betray me. This is the part where I tell you what I noticed before the words and the ink. Tessa's face wasn't triumphant. It was desperate. It looked like someone who'd been treading water so long she'd forgotten how to float. She believed, I think, that this would fix something, even if what it broke was me. No one followed me right away. They didn't know which script to use. Was this a fight you interrupt or a movie you watch to the end? I walked down the stairs and out into light that didn't match what was happening inside. In the car, I let the wheel be the thing I held on to. I thought about how fast a life can tilt, how a single sentence can rearrange furniture in a house you thought you knew. I thought about how Tessa must have rehearsed those lines, about how hard it must have been to say them out loud, about how hard it would be to take them back. Nathan had always said that truth is a long game. It doesn't always win the first round, but it doesn't lose its breath either. Sitting there with my cheeks hot and my heart thudding, I decided to play the long game. Not because I'm noble, because I knew what I knew, and I had the kind of patience grief leaves behind, a slow burn where a spark used to be. I started the engine, let it idle, and told myself I could handle the next hour, then the next. Later, I'd have to say hard things to Tessa. Later, I'd have to open files and call numbers and do the kind of practical work that keeps your mind from drifting into the places where it hurts. But first, I had to breathe. If you're wondering whether Tessa and I had warning shots before this, we did, just not like this. There had been looks I didn't love, jokes that landed wrong, texts Nathan showed me because he refused to hold secrets between us. There had been moments in kitchens and hallways where I saw Tessa forget where the lines were, and then remember, cheeks flushed, mouth softening into sorry. My parents had a way of smoothing her ruffles and handing me the iron. I didn't know then how those tiny things would line up, dominoes waiting for a thumb. I drove home slowly because I didn't trust myself to hurry. Beacon Hill looked the way it always looked, brick and iron and the kind of pretty that survives bad weather. Inside, the house felt aware of me. I slid my hand along the banister Nathan had sanded smooth and let that be a kind of prayer. On the dining table still sat the auction catalog from years ago, the page with the painting of Boston Harbor dog-eared. It felt like a circle I hadn't drawn closing around me. Nothing about what Tessa said could make Noah any less perfect or any less himself. That was the thought that let me sleep a few hours that night. The rest could wait a day. The truth, the papers, the conversations that would scrape us down to the bone. They could take their turns. For now, I had a picture frame to straighten and a jacket of Nathan's to hang up and a quiet house that, even empty, still held on. Before the party and the papers and the way my hands shook on the steering wheel, there were smaller things that only looked small because they came one at a time. Tessa has always treated attention like oxygen. She reaches for it without asking. After Nathan and I got married, she leaned into that habit around him in a way that made me pause. The first time it was a joke. She slid between us in a kitchen doorway, brushed his arm with the back of her hand, and said she might steal him for salsa lessons because I had 2 left feet. She laughed. He smiled politely and stepped away. I told myself families are messy and jokes are just jokes. Nathan never kept me guessing. If something landed wrong, he brought it to me the way he brought home flowers, like it belonged on the table we shared. He showed me a late-night text from Tessa, a harmless-seeming, "Are you awake?" that didn't need a reply. Another time, she sent him a selfie in a dress, asking his opinion because guys are more honest. He wrote back, "Ask Emily, she has the eye," then handed me the phone so I'd see it too. We agreed on a simple rule. No secrets between us, not even the tiny kind you pretend are nothing. I tried to talk to my parents once, gently, the way you carry a glass of water across a room. My mom smoothed my hair like I was 12 and said Tessa is affectionate and doesn't know how she comes across. She didn't mean anything by it, she said, as if meaning were the only measure. My dad squeezed my shoulder and told me not to borrow trouble. It was the family rhythm I knew too well, my sister getting the benefit of every doubt, me getting the job of making everything tidy. I went home frustrated and then guilty for being frustrated, which is a treadmill you can stay on for years. We set boundaries that didn't need a family meeting. In group settings, Nathan and I stuck close. If Tessa hovered, he'd find a reason to refill drinks or step onto the porch. He stopped replying to any message that wasn't a group thread or obviously about a plan I was already in. If she touched his sleeve, he'd move with the kind of quiet that says no without turning it into a scene. We didn't turn it into a fight because we didn't want to fight. We wanted our life. We also started writing things down, not because we were looking for trouble, but because clarity is kind when memory gets foggy. Dates, a sentence or two about what happened, who was there. It lived in a shared note on our phones, tucked between grocery lists and paint codes. There were slips that made my stomach knot. At a 4th of July barbecue, Tessa dropped herself into Nathan's lap like it was the most natural seat in the yard. He stood up so smoothly she ended up on the cushion alone. Then he handed me the tongs and asked if I wanted another lemonade. She blushed, laughed too loud, and changed the subject. A week later, she sent him a "You up?" by mistake at 1:07 a.m. and followed it with "Oops" meant for Shane, which might have been true and might have been cover. Nathan showed me both messages and then muted the thread. We kept our kindness, but we kept our distance. Around that time, Nathan started complaining about a deep ache that came and went, a tired heaviness low in his belly that Advil wouldn't touch. He tried to wave it off, but I know the man who can ignore a splinter and the man who can't sleep through pain. And this was the second one. The urologist was careful and direct. A varicocele, he said. Tangled veins, not uncommon, fixable. The plan was surgery, a simple repair with an outpatient recovery that promised relief. In the bright, cold light of the exam room, Nathan's shoulders dropped for the first time in weeks. What we decided next didn't come from fear. It came from the long, hard road we'd already walked. We were two people who had spent years building our hearts around a hope that didn't come, and then learning how to let that hope sit without hurting us every day. We talked for a long time, the kind of talk you can only have when you've run out of pretending. Nathan said he wanted to take his foot off a pedal we kept pressing out of habit. He said he wanted our life to be about what we had, not about what we kept chasing. I heard him, not just with my ears, but in that deep place where you store yes and no. So when the surgeon repaired the varicocele, Nathan also chose a vasectomy. It was planned, fully informed, signed in ink, we both understood. We kept it private because not everything tender belongs to the world, and because pity has a way of sticking to your clothes. The follow-up tests were clinical and boring. Numbers on a page, a 0 that was both an ending and a promise. 3 months later, the results matched the plan. The doctor gave us a brochure about what to expect and a handshake that said the rest of our life was ours to decide. We filed the paperwork in a folder with our mortgage documents and insurance policies, the grown-up drawer where you keep proof of things you can't see by looking. We didn't bring it up at family dinners. We didn't owe anyone a syllabus for our marriage. Nathan made dumb jokes about being a retired factory, and I rolled my eyes and kissed him anyway. The ache that had kept him up at night went away. He slept better. He smiled easier. We turned back to our house and our work and the small rituals that make a day feel like yours. Morning coffee, he insisted on making 2 week, the walk around the block at dusk, the way he sang the wrong lyrics on purpose just to make me correct him. If you're doing the math, you've already landed where I landed the moment Tessa lifted those papers at Noah's party. Nathan's surgery happened 2 years before Noah was even conceived. There wasn't room for maybes or might-haves. It wasn't about opinion. It was biology and time. A door that had been closed with care and intention long before this new story tried to wedge itself inside. I wish I could tell you my parents heard the boundaries we set and held them with us. But habits are stubborn. When I told my mom, carefully, that Tessa's flirtiness wasn't harmless anymore, she sighed and said, "Sweetheart, she's insecure." Like insecurity were a hall pass. When I said Nathan and I were creating space, she said, "Don't make this bigger than it is." And I felt the old tug to be the even one, the steady one, the fixer. My dad's advice was to keep the peace, as if peace were something you can have without lines. We kept the lines anyway. Nathan kept looping me into any family thread. If Tessa angled a joke toward him, he angled it back toward me. If she reached for attention, we let the reach land on air. It wasn't dramatic. It was steady. It was the shape of our marriage. 2 people standing next to each other in a way that says, "This is the team." That's the part I held in my chest when I sat in my car after the birthday announcement and let that strange laugh burn itself out. I wasn't laughing at pain. I was laughing at the audacity of a story trying to rewrite facts that were stitched into our life 2 years before that baby took his first breath. Tessa had forgotten, or never known, where the lines were. Nathan and I hadn't. We had kept receipts, and we had kept faith with each other. The truth didn't need a spotlight. It just needed time. The night before the party, I slept in small, hard pieces. When morning came, I lay in the hush and traced the ceiling cracks like a map, then did the only thing that made sense. I put on a clean sweater, grabbed the folder key I'd been pretending I didn't need, and drove to the bank. Before that morning, before the cake and the fake pages and my laugh in the car, there had been a different kind of errand with Nathan. A quiet future proofing that felt at the time like being careful with the corners of our life. It started after one of those family gatherings where Tessa's jokes slid too close to the line. Nathan made tea, waited until the kettle stopped rattling, and said, "I don't want to leave you any messes I can clean up now." He wasn't talking about death. He was talking about noise. He said we should be boringly prepared. He said peace is easier to keep than to win back. We met with an attorney named Robert Hayes in an office with shelves that made me want to measure them. Robert listened the way good doctors do. No rush, no theatrics, every word landing where it should. Nathan explained the boundary stuff without turning it into a soap opera. He mentioned the surgery, the follow-up tests, the way our marriage worked like a small, well-built bridge you could trust your weight on. Robert nodded and asked smart questions. He suggested we build a file that would hold up to time and to scrutiny, a will that left everything to me, a letter of instruction, certified copies, the medical records that made the biology plain, a brief chronology Nathan had kept in his notebook, dates, impressions, a few screenshots of messages printed and clipped. "Facts are kind," Robert said, sliding a legal pad toward us. Nathan squeezed my hand under the table. The will wasn't dramatic, it was practical. It said what Nathan had always said out loud, that the house, the accounts, the work we had done side by side belonged with me. Robert had us initial places I wouldn't have known to look without him. A notary stamped the pages with a thump that felt bigger than it sounded. We left with certified copies and a plan for where the originals would live, away from curious hands. A safe deposit box rented in both our names. On the way home, Nathan teased that we were the kind of people who label the label maker, and I told him I loved us exactly like that. Back in the bank, months after that meeting and one day after Tessa's announcement, the fluorescent lights hummed a neutral hum. A clerk checked my ID, slid a form across the counter, and led me down a quiet hall. The vault always feels like a scene in a movie. Cold air, concrete that refuses to echo. The box was heavier than I remembered. I set it on the little table, sat in a chair that squeaked, and let my hands be slow. Inside, everything was where we'd put it. The envelopes were labeled in Nathan's square printing, will, medical, notes, and one more I hadn't seen the day we packed it. Emily. I took a breath and started with the part meant for other people. The will had a raised seal you could feel with your fingertip, signatures in blue ink, a notary's commission number embossed like a tiny coin. Robert had clipped a cover letter to it with a list of what to do if anyone questioned its validity. His office number, a sentence about where the originals were kept, here in my hands, and a note that he held duplicates. There was language no template could fake without tripping. Residuary this, devise that, dates that made sense, names that didn't wobble. The medical folder was clinical and merciless, in the way science is merciless. The dates lined up. Diagnosis, repair, vasectomy, follow-up, the test showing 0 where 0 was supposed to be. Stapled to the back was a summary from the urologist, the kind insurance loves and grief hates. Concise, clear, no room for maybe. Nathan had paper-clipped a copy of his discharge instructions with a tiny smiley face sticky note I'd drawn on the day I drove him home. It made my throat sting. His notes were what you'd expect from an engineer who built shelves and saved receipts. He hadn't written a manifesto. He'd made a timeline. An entry here. Tessa's text at 1:07 a.m., followed by oops. A line there. 4th of July, lap incident stood up, lemonade. A few sentences about the meeting with Robert and why we'd chosen to be this kind of prepared. He'd tucked in 2 printed photos. The pantry cat drawing from our wall, and us on the porch with dust in our hair. Both of us laughing at something the camera didn't catch. He had labeled them reminders. I left the Emily envelope for last because I knew once I opened it, I wouldn't be able to unread whatever lived inside. It was thin and unsealed, like he wanted it to breathe. His handwriting slanted slightly right, neat even when his words ran hot. He didn't waste the first line on platitudes. He wrote, "If you're holding this, it means something loud is happening. I'm sorry I'm not there to sit at the table with you and make the loud thing less loud. Breathe. Use the facts. Call Robert. He likes you. Don't let anyone make you argue feelings against paper." I didn't leave you a puzzle on purpose. I left you a shield. He told me he knew I'd keep my dignity even when it would feel good to set it down and swing. He told me, because he always did, to eat something with protein, to sleep more than I thought I could, to let the house hold me up the way we'd designed it to. He told me that if Tessa ever needed help that didn't involve setting myself on fire, I'd know where the line was. He reminded me that none of this, none, was my fault. Not the biology, not the grief, not other people's choices. He signed his name, and beneath it, the nickname he only used in notes on the fridge. I read it twice, then a third time, because the first pass soaked into my heart, and the next passes turned into instructions my hands could follow. I put every page back exactly where it had been, slid the will and the medical summary and the cover letter into my bag, and returned the rest to the box. I left the Emily letter out because some things belong with your body, not in a vault. On my way out, the clerk asked if I needed copies made. I shook my head and said I had what I came for. In the car, I rested my palms on the steering wheel, same as the day before, but the feeling shifted. Yesterday, I had braced myself against absurdity. Today, I was holding proof. The difference is subtle until it isn't. Proof doesn't make pain smaller, but it makes the next step firmer. Back home, I cleared a space on the dining table and made a neat stack. Will on top, medical summary beneath, Robert's letter clipped in front like a cover. I added a sticky note with his office number, and for the first time since the party, felt a plan that didn't taste like adrenaline. Nathan had laid the groundwork so I wouldn't have to build while the storm was already on top of me. He couldn't be here to stand shoulder to shoulder, but he'd left me the next best thing. I slid his letter into the drawer with the everyday things: measuring tape, pens, the little screwdriver we always misplaced, because I wanted it close. Then I turned on the kettle the way he used to, listening for the soft change in the boil that meant it was time. I didn't know yet exactly how the conversations would go or which order I'd make the calls. I only knew I wouldn't be walking into those rooms empty-handed. Nathan had made sure of that. Robert answered on the second ring and told me to come in. His building sits over a cafe that always smells like toasted sesame, and for a second, those ordinary smells steadied me. In his office, the shelves were just as precise as I remembered. He had a yellow pad in front of him, a pen uncapped, the posture of someone already listening. I slid the counterfeit will across the desk, then set my stack beside it, the certified copy of Nathan's actual will, the medical summary, his cover letter. Robert read the fake first. He didn't make the face people make when they want you to feel better. He made the face of a man putting puzzle pieces on the table to see what fits. His finger traced a line. He hummed without sound. Misspellings, he said quietly, tapping whereas, wrong statutory references, clauses in the wrong order, no attestation language that would pass in Massachusetts. And this signature, if someone tried to simulate Nathan's hand from an image, they didn't account for pressure or lift. He lifted his eyes to mine. This would not survive even a casual challenge. He moved to our documents, and the tension in my jaw loosened as he named what I already knew. He pointed to the raised seal, the notary stamp, his own letter on top. He skimmed the medical summary and nodded with a tiny, grim smile that said, "Facts are merciful, even when they sting." "We have this," he said, tapping the packet. "Now the question is how you want to handle the other part." I told him I didn't want a spectacle. I told him I wanted something that would stay done. He capped his pen and leaned back. "We can go to the police with what you've brought. Attempted fraud, forgery, that path is tidy in one sense. There's a process, a charge, and you won't have to do the moral math alone. But it's public, and prosecutors like clean cases. They don't always care about repair." He paused. "Or we can gather more context, understand motive and players, then decide whether a private resolution protects you better." "I don't want revenge," I said, surprising both of us with how plain it sounded. "I want this to stop. I want Noah safe. I want to keep my life intact." Robert nodded like he'd been waiting for that sentence. "Then you might benefit from a private investigator. I know someone who doesn't gossip and doesn't scare easily." He scribbled a name and number and slid the note toward me. Mark Doyle. He used to be a reporter. Now he's the kind of person who can find a lease payment buried under 4 bad decisions. I called Mark on the sidewalk, the phone warm against my ear despite the chill. His voice was steady, unhurried. He didn't promise miracles. He promised a plan. A week of pulling public records, walking by doors, talking to people who talk. He emailed a short agreement with clear terms and a rate that sounded like money but not like a trap. I signed, sent it back, and felt the click of a gear sliding into place. Mark started with what he could touch without knocking. Court dockets, property records, social media that wanted to be seen. 2 days in, he called with a list that made my chest tight. Not from shock, but from the kind of recognition you get when you finally look directly at a thing you've been glancing past. Tessa is 3 months behind on rent, he said. Landlord filed a notice to quit. Summary process scheduled for 2 weeks from now. She has about 75 grand in revolving debt. 2 cards maxed, 1 personal loan, 1 line that looks like a payday product under a different name. He hesitated. I also see an ER bill sent to collections. Nothing catastrophic. Death by 1,000 copays. I sat down on the top step and watched a neighbor walk a dog with a sweater on. Keep going. Shane left town 8 weeks ago. Seattle. Job at a bar off Pike that changes names every year. He's sending some money. Erratic cash apps that look like he's paying when he remembers or when someone reminds him. He also has a bench warrant in another state for failure to pay child support from before Tessa. There's a prior arrest for disorderly conduct and 1 domestic incident. No conviction, a stay-away order that lapsed. The words were dry, factual. The picture they made was not. Chaos in motion, charm that didn't keep the lights on, promises that turned back into smoke. It didn't excuse what Tessa had done. It did make it make a terrible kind of sense. Mark didn't just pull records. He walked. He went to the building where Tessa lived and counted the number of names on buzzers. He noticed the trash chute jammed with boxes that used to hold bulk diapers. He chatted with a super who talked when someone else took out a cigarette. He found Kara, because people like Kara are always findable. She runs to the store and runs into everyone. She's jumpy, he told me, but she likes Noah, and she's afraid of court. I didn't push. I asked questions and let the silence do the rest. The next morning, he sent me screenshots Kara had forwarded after a night of worrying herself into sweat. A thread with Tessa that read like a script being rehearsed. The messages weren't subtle. Tessa, it needs to say the house is half mine because of Noah. Kara, I told you this is not how wills work. Tessa, Josh can fix the wording. He knows how to make it look right. Then a photo of a laptop screen with Nathan's signature from a public work page, cropped tight. Kara again, this is a bad idea. Tessa, it's survival. There were dates I could map against the week leading up to Noah's party. There were emojis that made me feel older than I am. And there was enough specificity to show that this wasn't a rumor. It was a plan. Who's Josh? I asked. A freelance design guy, Mark said. Not good, but available. He's done flyer work for a friend of Kara's. He told her once he can make any document look official. His words. I haven't spoken to him. Yet. Don't, I said fast. Not yet. The idea of stirring that pot without a lid made my stomach flip. Mark understood. I'm not looking to escalate. I'm building a map. He exhaled into the phone. A small sound. Emily, I want to say this carefully. What Tessa's doing is wrong. What she's in is also precarious. She isn't a mastermind. She's drowning and grabbing whatever floats. I thought of her face at the party, the way desperation had smudged out triumph. I thought of Noah banging a spoon like a drum. The anger didn't vanish. It settled into something with edges I could hold without cutting myself. By the end of the week, Mark had a neat packet ready for Robert and me. Copies of the eviction notice, a ledger from the court's public terminal, screenshots of Tessa and Kara's messages with timestamps and phone numbers visible, a brief on Shane with his recent address, the bar's name, the warrant information, and a summary written in plain English. No flourishes, just what we might need if talk turned into something else. Robert read it twice, tapping his pen against his pad. This is enough to take to the DA and make noise, he said. It's also enough to have a very firm conversation that might steer this away from court. You said you wanted to avoid spectacle. That's still possible. But I need to prepare you for the fact that avoiding spectacle may not mean avoiding consequence. If we go private, we'll set terms that protect you. We'll document everything. And if she breaks those terms, we'll be positioned to act without starting from zero. What would private look like? I asked. A meeting on your turf or neutral ground, an admission, a written agreement, no claims against the estate or the house, an apology you can hold, an acknowledgement of the forgery, conditions, therapy, financial counseling, No contact for a period without counsel present unless about Noah's welfare. You can choose to support Noah directly in a way that bypasses Tessa if you want. Trust structure, receipts required, third-party oversight. If she balks at any of it, we stop being gentle. The words trust and oversight landed like soft stones in my hands. I stared out his window at a slice of Boston sky and tried to find the part of me that wanted to punish versus the part of me that wanted to fix. Punishment felt hot and brief. Fixing felt like work I could survive. I want to talk to my therapist before I decide, I said. Not because I don't know, but because I don't trust the part of my brain that's been crying in the shower. Good, Robert said. I like decisions made by their whole owner. Call me after. Dr. Grace Lynn's office is the opposite of Robert's. Plants that trail like sentences, soft lamps, tissue within reach, but not in the line of sight. I sat on her couch and told the story straight through without pausing to make it prettier. The fake will, the bank box, Mark's packet, the text that looked like a roadmap to a bad idea. I told her about the version of me that wanted to drive to Tessa's with the file and a bullhorn, and the version that wanted to crawl under a blanket and not come out until spring. What do you want your future self to thank you for? She asked, resting her ankle on her knee. It was a cheap therapist question, the kind that risks sounding like a magnet on a fridge. But coming from her, it slid past my eye roll and landed where it needed to. Not the you who was just hurt. The you who has to live in this city, in this family, in that house. I closed my eyes and saw Noah's frosting-smeared face. I saw the pantry cat drawing taped inside our door. I saw Nathan's sharp printing on an envelope that said Emily. I want him protected, I said, meaning Noah. I want me protected, I added, surprising myself how hard it was to say that out loud. And I don't want to become someone I won't recognize 6 months from now. So, she said gently, what kind of boundary gives you that? One with paperwork, I answered, and we both half laughed. One that doesn't depend on memory or mood, one that says yes to Noah and no to chaos. We sketched the bones of it right there, what I could offer without feeding the fire, what I would not tolerate, how to speak without swinging. She reminded me that empathy isn't a coupon Tessa can cash in for access. She reminded me that choosing a quieter path doesn't mean I'm weak. It means I'm choosing my values on purpose. When I left, I didn't feel triumphant. I felt aligned, like the picture frame in the hallway finally sat straight. I called Robert from the sidewalk. Private, I said, but with teeth. He didn't miss a beat. I'll draft an agreement. We'll invite her with counsel if she wants. We'll be explicit about the forgery. Before we sit down, I want her to consent to an audio recording of the conversation. Massachusetts law allows one-party consent, but we'll ask anyway. I prefer the kind of clean that doesn't require a fight later. I want the meeting at my house, I said, surprising myself. The thought of letting this enter my space made my stomach tense, but I also knew where I felt strongest. Beacon Hill has my breath in the walls. Nathan's steadiness is in the banister. If I had to do this anywhere, I wanted that under my feet. We'll do it your way, Robert said. I'll bring a witness. We'll keep it focused. And Emily? Eat something first. I hung up and stood on the stoop for a moment, watching a delivery truck do the dance it does on our narrow street. The plan wasn't revenge in a dress. It was a door with a lock I could trust. It was not letting a bad choice drag me into a worse one. I went inside, opened the drawer with Nathan's letter, and read it again. Shield, he'd called it. I ran my thumb along the edge of the page and said out loud to an empty room, "All right, let's do this." I set the house the way I do for clients when I need them to feel steady. Water glasses in reach, a box of tissues within eyesight but not center stage, a chair for me where I could see the door and the banister Nathan had sanded smooth. Robert arrived first with his paralegal, Hannah, who has the calm of someone who double-checks everything twice. We went over the plan one more time. Keep it simple, keep it factual, ask for consent to record, and then we waited. Tessa came in like a storm trying to remember how to be a person. She hugged herself with her own elbows and stared at the floorboards like they were judging her. I asked if she wanted tea. She said no. I told her I wanted to record the conversation so we wouldn't argue with our memories later. Okay, she said, and I pressed the button. On the audio, you can hear the soft pop of the recorder and her voice saying yes. She started before I could ask a question. Nathan and I... It wasn't supposed to happen. She said the words like she'd practiced them in the mirror. We saw each other a few times. He said he felt trapped, like you didn't get him. He said I made him feel free. Her chin jutted out the way it does when she's daring you to say she's lying. The last time was the week Noah was conceived. He told me he'd figure out the house. He told me not to tell you yet because of your feelings. The picture she painted was almost good if you didn't know any colors. I kept my face still. Where? I asked. A hotel, she said quickly. Downtown, the one with the gold lobby. What did he order to drink? She blinked. Whiskey? Nathan didn't drink whiskey, I said, not unkindly. Coffee, beer with friends, the occasional terrible margarita he'd make too sour on purpose. She pushed on. He liked his coffee black. He liked it weak enough to make fun of, I said, and her mouth twitched. What side does he sleep on? I asked. She paused, recalibrating. Left. Right, I said. Since we moved in. He says the left vent rattles when the heat kicks on. Robert didn't look at me. He looked at the recorder as if making sure it kept catching air. What song did he put on when he built shelves? I asked. Why does that matter? Because if you're asking me to swallow the worst story of my life, I need it to be real, I said. He sang the wrong lyrics on purpose to make me correct him. He thought it was hilarious. It wasn't. My voice wobbled on the last word. I let it. She tried a new angle. He wore that cedar cologne, she said, uncertain now, a student guessing. He's allergic, I said softly. He smelled like sawdust and laundry soap and the mint gum he pretended didn't count as sugar. The room went very quiet. Hannah's pen rested still on her legal pad. Tessa's bravado drained into the space between her shoulders. I'm not here to humiliate you, I said, but I'm not going to be played. I slid the first folder across the table. This is Nathan's will. It leaves everything to me. It's notarized and filed. Robert drew it up. The document you waved around at Noah's party is a forgery. It's sloppy and it's illegal. She flinched like I'd tossed the papers at her instead of setting them down. You don't understand. I put a palm up. I'm not done. I slid the second folder forward. This is Nathan's medical file. 2 years before Noah was conceived, Nathan had a varicocele repaired and chose a vasectomy. The follow-up tests show exactly what they're supposed to show after that, which means your story is biologically impossible. I kept my voice level on that word, the way Robert had coached me. No heat, only fact. Tessa stared at the pages like they'd rearranged themselves. Her mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes shone but didn't spill. He told me, no, I said. He didn't. I reached for the third stack, and because I believe in facts, not in shouting, I asked someone to gather context. A private investigator. Mark found your eviction notice. He found the debt. He found the Cash App transfers from Shane that don't cover diapers, let alone rent. He found texts between you and Kara. I placed the printed screenshots gently in front of her. She didn't touch them. The words were there anyway. It needs to say the house is half mine. Josh can fix the wording. This is a bad idea. It's survival. The dates lined up like a train schedule. Tessa's face crumpled in a way I'd never seen, like the muscles forgot how to hold a story together. She covered her mouth with shaking fingers and made a small sound that wasn't crying and wasn't not crying. I'm sorry, she said, but it came out shaped like a question. Who is Josh? Robert asked, his voice even. He didn't have to add, we already knew. A guy Kara knows, she whispered. He makes posters and stuff. He said he could make it look real if I got a clean signature. I found one online, from Nathan's work thing. She swallowed hard. I didn't think it would hurt anyone. I mean, I did, but I thought I had to. I thought if I didn't do something, we'd lose the apartment. They were going to take us to court. Shane said he'd help, and then he left. He kept saying Seattle was just for a few months, and then he stopped picking up. Is Noah Shane's son? I asked. It felt like lifting a heavy lid. Her nod was tiny and immediate, like the part of her that tells the truth had been waiting for permission. Yes, she said, voice cracking. He's Shane's. You understand, Robert said, precise and calm, that what you attempted is fraud, forgery. There are criminal penalties. We have enough to involve law enforcement today. She folded in on herself, one arm across her stomach like it hurt. Please don't, she said to the table. Please, I am desperate. I made the worst choice. I know. I looked at her, at the sister I'd spent a lifetime translating for our parents, the girl who used to hide under the table during thunderstorms and count with me until the lightning felt less like a monster. Anger sat next to grief in me, both present, both earned. But there was also a small, stubborn tenderness for the baby who had banged a spoon like a drum. This stops now, I said. No more stories, no more papers, no more rehearsed lines. You will own what you did. You will make it right where you can, and you won't drag my husband's name through your mess again. She nodded fast, tears finally spilling, messy and real. I'll do whatever you say, she whispered. I'll apologize. Please don't take Noah's mom away in handcuffs. He needs me. Then start by telling the truth on the record, Robert said, tapping the recorder with his pen so the sound marked the moment. State your name and say that the will you presented at your son's birthday was fabricated with assistance from Josh at your request, using a digital image of Nathan's signature, and that you knew at the time it was false. Her eyes darted to mine, then to Hannah, then to the little red light. She took a breath so big it lifted her shoulders. She said her name. She said the words. Her voice broke in the middle and she kept going. When she finished, the room felt different, like someone had opened a window in winter and let in air no one asked for and everyone needed. Robert clicked the recorder off. We'll discuss next steps, he said, standing, giving her a merciful minute to wipe her face without an audience. There will be terms. They will be clear. And if you violate them, we won't have this conversation again. We'll have a different one with other people in the room. Tessa nodded, staring at the tissues in her hand like she'd never seen paper behave that way. I'm sorry, she said again, this time to me, not to the floor. I don't know how to be better at life. You start today, I said, and you start with honesty. After they left, after the door clicked and the house went back to its quiet, I sat on the bottom stair and let my head fall into my hands. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt spent, like I'd held a weight out at arm's length and finally put it down. I opened the drawer and took out Nathan's letter. Shield, he'd called it. I ran my finger along the word until my breath smoothed out. Then I stood up and began to think about what keeping Noah safe would look like in ink. Robert's draft landed in my inbox the next morning. 12 pages, crisp margins, no room for wishful thinking. He called it a settlement and acknowledgement, which is lawyer for we're going to write down the truth and what happens next. I read it at the dining table with my coffee going cold. The language was steady, almost plain. Tessa would admit on paper that the will she waved at Noah's party was fabricated with help from Josh, using Nathan's digital signature. She would agree to make no claim ever against the estate, the house in Beacon Hill, or any asset held in Nathan's name. She would apologize in writing to me, to my parents, and to anyone who'd heard her story at the party. She would withdraw the story about Nathan being Noah's father and agree not to repeat it. She would consent to therapy and financial counseling, sign releases so attendance could be confirmed, and secure stable employment within a set time frame. She would allow me limited oversight related to Noah's welfare, pediatric appointments, emergency contacts, school forms, so help could go to him without getting lost in the chaos. In return, I would not pursue criminal charges so long as she honored every term. I would fund a small trust for Noah's health and education, separate from any money Tessa could touch directly. I would, for a short window, pay rent directly to her landlord to stop the immediate crisis from becoming a catastrophe for a 1-year-old. We met again in my living room because I needed the banister and the light in the front window, and the sense that the house remembered us. Robert sat beside me with Hannah on the end of the couch, her folder a tidy tower. Tessa looked smaller than last time, like a body deflated by the cost of pretending. She kept one hand on her phone like a talisman. Robert took his time. He walked her through each paragraph and paused to ask if she understood. He didn't use the tone people use with children. He used the tone you use with adults who need the dignity of clarity. This section, he said, tapping the page, is about your admission and retraction. This one is about your commitment to stop telling a story that isn't true. If you violate this, Emily reserves the right to involve law enforcement without further discussion. He slid to the next page. Here's the part where you agree to therapy. You choose the provider, not Emily. You sign a release so we can confirm attendance, not content. It's not surveillance, it's accountability. He went on. Financial counseling, a reputable nonprofit, not a payday consolidator. You'll create a budget and a plan to address debt. You'll show you're following it. Bank statements, not promises. He pointed again. Employment, full or part-time, within 60 days. Proof of income. If you need help building a resume, there are resources. No more reset weeks that last months. He touched the last major section. No claims, no contact except about Noah unless invited. And finally, the trust for Noah, which we'll discuss after you sign. Tessa listened with her lips pressed flat. Twice she reached for the tissue box and set it back without taking one. When he finished, she looked at me, not him. "I'll sign," she said, voice thin. "I will, but the apology..." She swallowed. "Do I have to do it in front of everyone?" "You started it in front of everyone," I said. "The correction belongs in the same light." She dropped her gaze. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." She signed on the flagged lines. Hannah notarized, her stamp leaving a neat emboss like a small footprint. Robert slid copies into labeled envelopes. Tessa, Emily, counsel. It wasn't dramatic. It was deliberate, which felt better. Then we talked about Noah. "I won't hand you cash," I said. "That helps no one and makes a bad pattern worse. I will help in ways that go straight to him." I turned to Hannah, who had the cool efficiency of someone who could build a ship inside a bottle. "Let's set up a 529 for education," I said. "I'll fund it and be the owner. Tessa, you'll be listed as a contact so you can see what's there. You won't take money out. That's not how these work. But you'll know it's real." I looked at Tessa again. "For medical, we'll create a small trust with Robert's firm as trustee. It will pay for pediatric visits, prescriptions, and anything clearly health-related. You submit bills. The trust pays providers directly. No reimbursement, no cash leaks." Tessa nodded, tears finally making their slow way down. "Thank you," she said, like the words hurt but fit. "As for housing," Robert said, sliding a clean sheet onto the coffee table, "Emily is willing to pay 3 months of rent directly to your landlord to stop the eviction process, contingent on this signed agreement and proof that you've scheduled therapy and counseling. After that, if you want to move to a place you can afford on your own income, we can help with a security deposit paid directly to the new landlord. No wire transfers to you." He looked at Tessa over his reading glasses. "This is for Noah's stability. It's not a stipend." "And I'm not your plan," I added gently. "I'm a bridge." She flinched at that and nodded. "I get it." We spent the next hour doing the kind of work that doesn't look like a story until you're the one living inside it. Hannah called the landlord while we sat there, confirmed the balance, got wiring instructions, and asked for written acknowledgement that a payment would stop the court date. Tessa handed over the eviction notice with shaky hands and watched Hannah scan it for the file. Robert emailed over a list of sliding scale therapists and counseling agencies that don't prey on desperation. Tessa picked one with Saturday hours and put her first appointment on the calendar while we watched. Not to treat her like a child, but to fold this choice into the part of the day where things were getting done. We agreed on guardrails around Noah. I would be added as an authorized pickup for daycare and as an emergency contact at the pediatrician. I'd have access to his portal for immunizations and appointments. I'd take him on Sunday afternoons twice a month so Tessa could work a shift or rest or both. If she needed anything outside that, she'd ask in writing. If she sent me spirals of texts when panic hit, I'd answer when I could, not when her adrenaline told her I must. We wrote it all down. It looked colder on paper than it felt sitting in my living room, but I've learned that paper is kinder than memory. When the paperwork slowed, Tessa stared at the pantry door like she could see through it to the drawing taped inside. "You kept the cat," she said, surprising me. "It keeps us honest," I said. "It remembers who we wanted to be." She gave a small, helpless laugh that wasn't happy, but wasn't hopeless either. "I don't know how to do life without making it worse," she said, almost to herself. "That's why you have professionals now," I said. "Not me. People whose job is to help you build a map you can follow. You don't have to invent this from scratch." Robert tapped the final page of the agreement with his pen. "2 more things," he said. "First, the public apology. You and Emily will set a date, soon, for a family dinner. You'll say what you said on the record today, out loud to the people you hurt, and you'll ask them to let you start over. That's not for Emily's ego, it's for clarity. Second, if Josh contacts you about money, about quiet, about anything, you'll forward it to me. He can answer to different people for the part he played." Color drained from Tessa's face. "He wanted a cut," she admitted. "He said 5% of whatever I won. He thinks he's smart." "He can be smart somewhere else," Robert said dryly. "You're done with him." We set the dinner for the following Thursday, early enough that no one could call work an excuse. I texted my parents and asked them to come without deflecting. My dad sent a thumbs up. My mom called and said, "Sweetheart," and "What is this about?" and "Why are we being so formal?" And I said, "Because the truth deserves a chair." And she sighed and said they'd be there. After Tessa left, the house sagged with me. I leaned against the banister and let my eyes close. The plan wasn't pretty, but it was sturdy. It didn't make me a saint. It made me a woman who wanted to get to next year with her head clear and her heart intact and a baby boy getting his shots on time. Over the next few days, the scaffolding went up. The landlord emailed a receipt and a grudging case adjourned. The 529 account blinked to life with a balance that made me feel like I had put a hand on the future and held it steady for a second. Robert's office drafted the trust document for Noah's medical expenses, and I signed it with a pen that felt heavier than it was. Tessa sent me a screenshot of her therapy intake form, and then, a day later, a picture of a waiting room with ugly chairs and a potted plant trying its best. I didn't reply with a parade. I replied, "Good." On Sunday, I picked up Noah for the first time under the new rules. He grinned at me with all 8 teeth, peanut butter hair and shoes on the wrong feet. We went to the park and counted dogs. I packed snacks I knew he'd eat and wiped cinnamon from his chin and sent one photo to Tessa of him pointing at a squirrel like he'd discovered a new species. She wrote back a heart and didn't follow it with a crisis. It felt like a truce with the day. That night, I sat at the dining table with the trust folders and Nathan's letter side by side. "Shield," he'd written. It didn't mean I had to stand still and take hits. It meant I had a way to protect what mattered without swinging wild. I made a list for Thursday. Talking points, the order of who would speak, where the tissues would sit. I wasn't planning a performance. I was building a container so the truth wouldn't spill everywhere and stain the corners. On Wednesday, Tessa texted me a draft of her apology. It was the kind of thing you write when you're afraid. Too many explanations, not enough ownership. I sent it back with edits that stripped out the weather and left the forecast. I lied. I asked for help in the wrong way. I hurt you. I am sorry. I will be doing A, B, and C to repair. It looked brutal on the screen. It would be merciful in a room. Before bed, I walked through the house, straightening what didn't need straightening, the way you do when you're calming your own body. I touched the pantry door where the cat lives. I looked at the Boston Harbor painting in the catalog still on our table. The dog-eared page, a circle I hadn't known would be this important. I tucked the agreement into a folder by the front door and put my hand on the wood like I could feel Nathan's knuckles on the other side of time. This wasn't triumph. It wasn't even relief yet. It was the quiet, durable sense that I had chosen a path I could live with. It was the knowledge that when we sat down at that table tomorrow, the truth would have a chair, and so would I. And when I looked at the baby who didn't ask for any of this, I could tell him one day that the adults did their best to build something steady where something ugly could have been. We set the table for an ordinary meal on a Thursday night because that's how you invite the truth in without making it wear a costume. I made chicken that didn't ask for praise, Mashed potatoes the way my dad likes them, green beans with lemon because my mom insists they taste fresher that way. I set tissues within reach and water where people could find it without interrupting themselves. The Boston evening pressed against the windows, all brick and narrow light. My parents arrived first. My dad kissed my temple and took in the room the way he takes in a box score, quietly, thoroughly. My mom carried a pie and a worry you could hear from the hallway. She said sweetheart twice before she took off her coat. Tessa came last, small inside a sweater that had lost a fight with the dryer, holding a folded paper like it might cut her. She sat where the light hit her face and didn't ask for wine. We ate enough to call it dinner. The sentences stayed short and busy. Work, weather, how the tea was late again, until there was nothing left to distract us. I nodded at Tessa. She unfolded her paper and read in a voice that shook but didn't stall. I lied, she began. I told a story about Nathan that wasn't true. I said Noah was his son. He is not. I asked a man named Josh to help me make a fake will using Nathan's signature from online so I could claim half the house. I did this because I was scared and drowning in bills. That does not make it right. I hurt Emily. I hurt you. She swallowed. I'm in therapy and financial counseling. I signed an agreement. I'm going to get a steady job and keep it. I'm sorry. The paper trembled in her hands. She set it down like it was hot. My mom started with old muscle memory. She's been under so much pressure, she said, her voice soft, eyes already glassy. Mom, I said, not unkindly, not soft. No. The word landed and stayed. This is where we stop smoothing it out. I love you, but if you rescue her tonight, you lose me tonight. I'm not playing both roles. My dad's chair creaked as he leaned forward. Your sister set terms, he said, voice level. She's keeping them. That's the lane. We're not adding back doors. My mom's mouth pressed into a line I knew from childhood. Then it softened. She nodded, tears slipping, and reached for Tessa's hand without yanking her up out of the consequence. I love you, she said to her. And then, to me, I hear you. Tessa looked at me like she was waiting for a sentence. I'll keep my word, she said quickly. All of it. You will, I said. And if you don't, we won't have this conversation again. We'll have a different one with different people. I glanced at our parents. No more under-the-table money, no secret rentals in your name, no, she didn't mean it speeches. If you help, it goes through the plan. If you can't do that, don't help. My dad nodded once decisively like he does when a game is out of reach, and he turns the TV off anyway. Done, he said. We'll stop confusing love with interference. We sat in the weight of that until it became air. Tessa reached for the tissues and laughed a raw laugh that didn't belong to a performance. The beans do taste fresher with lemon, she said, and my mom laughed too, one hand over her mouth like she was remembering how. When they left, my mom hugged me as if something old had been put down between us. My dad squeezed my shoulder the way he did when I got my driver's license. Tessa stood in the doorway, raincoat crooked in her hands. Thank you for not making me a villain and not making me a child, she said, eyes red, voice small. You're my sister, I said. Act like it. A year is both nothing and a miracle. It's 12 rent checks or 3, depending on how your life is built. It's how long tomatoes taste like summer on Charles Street and then how long they don't. It's the number of Sundays I drove to pick up Noah, who now runs down the hall in shoes on the right feet and yells my name like it's a game. We go to the park and count dogs and squirrels and construction cones. He knows the difference between an excavator and a backhoe with an authority I respect. On the pediatrician's portal, his shots blink green. He's tall for his age. He loves blueberries and the trash truck. When he's tired, he leans his whole weight against my shoulder like he trusts gravity to be kind. The trust we set up pays bills without passing through anyone's panic first. The 529 account lives like a jar of light I can't open, only tend. Sometimes when the day is heavy, I log in and look at the number, not to worship it, but to remember that time can move in the right direction. Tessa sends receipts to Robert's office without argument. The rent went out for 3 months and then stopped because she moved to a place her paycheck could carry. She took a front desk job at a dental clinic, the kind where you say yes to the early shift because it gets you home in time for daycare pickup. She has kept it through the kind of days that used to tip her over. She makes a budget and keeps it, imperfectly and then better. She goes to therapy on Saturdays and swears at the work and goes back anyway. We are not close the way movies love sisters to be. We are polite and sometimes warm. We exchange photos of Noah that make both of us smile before we remember the rest. On holidays, we keep the peace on purpose. When she wants more than I've offered, she asks and I answer in writing. When she spirals at her therapist. When she falls, she gets up herself and tells me later. It's not punishment. It's a boundary that keeps us both human. Shane is still in Seattle. He sends money when he remembers or when court paperwork reminds him, and that is its own gravity. He FaceTimes Noah enough to keep the word dad tethered to a face without anchoring it to the day-to-day. Tessa doesn't tell me every time he's late or every time he says he's sorry. That belongs to her and to her counselor. What belongs to me is the Sunday afternoon where Noah points at a tugboat on the Charles and yells, "Boat!" like he discovered it. I kept seeing Dr. Grace Lynn. We didn't meet every week forever. We tapered on purpose, not because pain has an end date, but because grief learned how to share the room. She asked me small questions that unlocked big ones, and when I built a new habit, she nodded like a coach who knows you're ready to run without counting every step out loud. I joined a grief support group that met in a room with bad coffee and excellent chairs. We didn't fix each other. We said names out loud and told the truths that make people fidget at parties. We passed photos around and made room for gallows humor and fell in love with the way someone else describes the shape of missing. On the night I brought a picture of Nathan with sawdust in his hair, they laughed at the wrong lyric story the way he would have wanted them to. I also built something in his name because love wants to turn into a verb. With Robert's help, I started a small scholarship for first-generation law students who want to be the kind of lawyer who listens first and stamps pages the way a steady heart beats. We called it the Nathan Hart Fund because anything fancier felt wrong. The first year, it was one student and a check that wasn't huge but wasn't nothing. I sat in the back of the awards night and cried quietly when a kid in a borrowed suit said he wanted to be the person you call when the loud thing happens. And I thought, yes, that. Friends showed up in ways that make a life feel carried. They fed me on Wednesdays without asking what I wanted. They took me to movies that didn't ask for feelings. They let me talk about Nathan until the story folded into the room like another piece of furniture. They sat on my porch in Beacon Hill and made fun of tourists gently. They replaced my humming refrigerator light and didn't make it a metaphor. And then there was Ethan. I met him the way you meet people when you're not trying to throw your heart like a net, through a friend of a friend, at a hardware store on a Saturday when I was buying screws and pretending to know exactly what kind. He asked me if I needed an opinion and then didn't give me one until I asked. He had a laugh that didn't demand an audience. He liked his coffee strong and made fun of my too-weak cup with the kind of affection you can lean on without falling through. I told him I was still stitched together with thread that pulls sometimes. He didn't try to be a remedy. He built me a short shelf for the pantry where the cat drawing lives and wrote his name and the date in pencil where only I would see it. I said we were going slow and he said good, like that was his idea too. If you're looking for moral clarity, I can offer you this much. Boundaries are the opposite of punishment. They're the geography where love can live. Documentation is not cynicism, it's kindness to your future self. The long game isn't glamorous, but it gets you home. When people tell you who they are with their patterns, believe them and build accordingly. Also, label the label maker. It will make you smile when you're rooting for tape at midnight. Beacon Hill still creaks when the temperature drops. The pantry door still hides a cat in a hat and a family that decided to tell the truth even when it made everyone cry. The harbor painting we never owned still makes me think about beginnings and endings, swapping coats when you aren't looking. Sometimes I wake up and reach for Nathan in the dark, and sometimes I wake up and reach for my phone to see if there's a photo of Noah holding up a leaf like it's a trophy. Both can be true. Both are my life. If you've listened this far, breathe with me. Put your hand on the thing that steadies you, a banister, a cup, a page with handwriting that makes you feel known. If this story gave you a nudge to draw a line, to make a plan, to choose the quiet path that holds, I'm glad. And if you want to hear more about what comes next, the messy middle, the shelves that finally got built, the day Noah learned the word why, hit like and subscribe. Life got cinematic without asking. I guess the least I can do is roll credits with the lights up.